When I started Tech Girl Talks, I was frustrated. I love esports and video games, but I kept seeing so much, I suppose rubbish might be the term, being tossed around when it came to certain topics. Social media created this space where everyone had an opinion, but they'd be damned if that opinion was even queried. It like gave rise to these outlandish statements and thoughts being passed off as facts, usually from individuals who'd probably never worked an esports broadcast, actually spoken to an esports professional player, or who had just happened to play a game but had like very little understanding of the other stuff they were adding their opinions to. The first season of this podcast was just me rambling to an audience, wanting to share my opinion, but also working to question my own opinion and critically think about how it had been formed or if it was even accurate, because I realized that I'm not always right. For season 2, I really wanted to do more. I also realized that me just sitting here spouting some random thoughts into a microphone actually wasn't enough, because sometimes my random thoughts, they don't come from a place of education and information and experience. So I began to formulate topics that I found really interesting, and then hunt down people who had years of practical experience to give their own insights. That's what this show is now. A selection of topics around esports and gaming that I believe are interesting, coupled with insights from leading industry experts to ensure you walk away informed and hopefully entertained. Season 2 is starting with a banger, and I mean, I'll admit the title is possibly a bit of a clickbaity one, but it got your attention, right? Why is no one watching your esports broadcast? We've all seen the ridiculous viewership numbers bandied around by mainstream media and the gazillion esports expert consultants who slither around on LinkedIn. But as someone who works on esports broadcasts as her bread and butter, I can tell you that very few esports broadcasts actually hit the massive numbers we see in those fancy PowerPoints. So why isn't your event or stream or even your esports content getting the stack of eyeballs that the snake oil salesmen are promising? I have some ideas and opinions on this, but I thought, you know what, there's a specific esports idol of mine who has far more insights and was willing to share it.
Richard Lewis, an esports aficionado it's coming up to 17 years now. Predominantly spent that as a journalist, an investigative journalist, recent Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, even though I'm not dead or close to it yet. Well, I certainly hope not. But yeah, been around the block, done a little bit of everything, and still here despite that.
Richard is far too humble, in my opinion. He's a leading esports investigative journalist. He's created a host of esports series, shows, and content that's gone on to see huge success. And he's worked on some of the biggest esports broadcasts in the world, from hosting to shoutcasting to talent managing to producing, conceptualizing the final product. I can go on and on and on. He has worked with everyone. He has worked on all the big events. And for me, if anyone had an idea of why certain esports content wasn't necessarily getting the views, it would be Richard Lewis. The most popular question I get asked when someone finds out what I do for a living is always, why would I want to watch someone else playing games? And if you're not even a fan of esports but listening, you might find yourself asking a similar question. Why would I want to watch a bunch of people playing games against one another? So let's go right back to the foundation before we spill the tea.
I'm an old guy. I'm a boomer. So I come from a pre-internet age. I remember the first tentative steps to having the internet. We didn't have it at home. I had to use the college internet, and I used to use it to look up authors I was interested in. I couldn't afford to buy the books, so I used to go to websites. I think there was one called Literary Kicks, and it used to publish, Jack Kerouac short stories and poems from Allen Ginsberg and that sort of thing. And so I would go into college and ask permission to use their internet to print off some things to read in my spare time. And that was with, God, I can't even remember the name of the search engine we used to use back then. This is, pre-Google, Alta Vista. There you go. That's how old I am. So there's now a generation that's been raised without ever knowing what it was like to be pre-internet. And everything we do is increasingly in digital spaces, especially now. I mean, this is particularly of interest because obviously a lot of us have been cooped up at home due to the ongoing situation with the pandemic. So everything we do is digital. We converse digitally. Some of us work digitally. We work remotely. We hold our meetings in lieu of getting in our car or getting on a plane. We use Zoom. We consume media not in print format anymore, but digitally. And obviously gaming at the same time, that's become the go-to pursuit for how you use your downtime. So, we all play video games. I mean, I always see these articles coming out about, 50% of people have played video. It's like, it's just ubiquitous now. There's no need to talk about it. It's a phenomenon that everybody does in the same way. You wouldn't be like sat here going, wow, everybody's played a card game at some point. Like, yes, going back to ancient times. Yes, absolutely correct. Yes, well done. Humans like recreation, it turns out. So now we use video games to fulfill that urge that we have. And so you've got a generation that do everything digitally. They talk to their friends digitally when they're out of school. Their recreation time is playing online, team building exercises done digitally. So what's the next thing you need? Well, again, the boomers, people like me, we think of competitive pursuits and sports. We say, don't sit in your room, don't sit in the dark. Get out there, touch grass, play football, go and get CTE from a contact sport. And actually that is appealing to some and less appealing to others, but humans still have competitive energy. And so going right back to the early days of gaming, pre-esports, what did we used to do? We used to have our friends come over and winner stays on, or I'm better than you, I'll kick your ass. Player 2 has entered the game. We created competition within this digital space. And so everybody wants to be good at something. Everybody wants to be the best at something. It's what drives us. So you fast forward to a point where marketing people and suits at big games development companies notice this. They also notice that if people are good at something, they don't cast it aside. So if you apply that to video games, the video game doesn't die. It doesn't die in its usual market cycle. You've got people that play competitive video games for 10 years, longer, and they're constantly wanting to improve and wanting to play. And so marketing suits noticed that and said, well, why don't we start baking in competitive elements to the game? Leagues, ladders, online play. And so as a result of that, this thirst for competitive excellence that we have starts getting applied to video games more and more. And this is the very early days of what your listeners will understand as esports. I mean, esports for me goes back to the arcades, when you used to put 10 pences into a machine. But so the marketing aspect of games development, they're essentially pandering to this now and using what we know, and more people are getting into it. And so people break away into communities and create leagues and create ladders. And so if you want to be good at something, you obviously want to consume as much knowledge as you can possibly get about something, about whatever that something is. And so in the same way, me in a college room wanting to learn more about 1950s American authors, the same way somebody that wants to be good at Fortnite today will go onto a YouTube and a Twitch, and they'll watch their favorite players, watch their favorite competitions, and wherever there's viewership, you can leverage that into money theoretically, and we have a sports model for that going back hundreds of 150 years. So it's just following a tale as old as time. If you build something and people are interested in it and want to do well at it and want to excel at it and can invest in it emotionally, then people will want to consume media that relates to it. And so the esports phenomenon, while it feels new and fresh because of the medium, is ultimately just a historical replication of things that have gone before in entertainment and sports. And I think it's an interesting combination of the two for the digital generation. It's where they channel their competitive energy for the most part.
So we have a ton of gamers, many who want to be competitive or who are searching out for the content around the games that they love. And everywhere you look, esports is touted as the magical unicorn that everyone and their mom needs to jump on and ride. Now, ironically, I mentioned moms. My mom actually did try to watch an esports event once, mainly because I was the desk host. So she texted me during the show to tell me she'd actually thoroughly enjoyed my desk segment, but she'd stopped watching when the cartoons came on. And that's a direct quote. Just in case you're confused, those cartoons were the actual video game that the players were competing in, by the way. It's a cutesy story, but I'm really just telling it to you to set up for the real meats and potatoes of this episode. The truth is, for every PowerPoint with fancy Super Bowl beating numbers, I can point you to more than 20 esports broadcasts that are being watched by less than 1,000 people at a time. So why are so many pieces of esports content lost to that deep pit in the internet where I presume live streams and past broadcasts go to die?
The first of all is product. I still think, in terms of content, I think, when I sit down and watch a mainstream sports broadcast, I look at all of the content around it, and some of it's good and some of it's bad. But generally, as a package, when I sit down to watch an NFL game, or if I sit down to watch a Premier League game, and I watch all of the build-up and all of that, what you have is compelling personalities that are generally allowed to operate, within, slightly outside of usual broadcasting parameters. In sports, there's this idea that it's okay to have iconoclasts that kind of tell it how it is, and people like that because people argue about sports down the pub with their friends, and when they see that replicated on TV, it's sort of a relatable experience. So in a build-up to a sports game, I think you get incredible commentary in terms of what the game, what's going to happen, and then you get all of these supplemental graphics and supplemental content, and here's an interview and here's a documentary, and it's all very expensive. And unfortunately, whatever people tell you about esports is not this guaranteed profitable business. The reality there is it's not really money that is holding back good content. It's just a failure to commit to making good content. In esports, I think the main fundamental problem the broadcasters have, the tournament organizers have, is they rely on the games to hold up the show. Which is fine. I mean, a lot of people are there to watch the game primarily, but I think we fall way, way short in what you would get in other sporting avenues. And I think as well, the problem you have with esports is it's a niche within a niche. So typically, historically, games developers have been terrible at conversion rates. Like, think about how many people play League of Legends and how they can't parlay that into higher viewership for their esports product. That's criminal to me. And they can trump it about, sure, for Worlds, where you have this inter-regional competition, they get these huge spikes, and that's when you see the nonsense about, we broke the Super Bowl record. Yeah, you absolutely did if you include all those fake Chinese numbers, fine. But, the reality is their weekly league product in Europe and America, their viewership's been dwindling, and it's a little bit of a spurned opportunity if you go right back to the roots of the game. It's the same in a lot of games. The games developers, when they run their leagues, they're super ultra focused on how they make the money. And so all the content and all the budget goes on just making the game, because that's where you get the consumer. That's where you get the people who spend cash. But the esports product is essentially kind of just left to trundle along and essentially act as a marketing tool. So, there's not really, esports is a phenomenon, but it's a very underserved and undervalued phenomenon, funnily enough, from the people that would benefit the most from it, in my opinion.
I've had the opportunity to work on esports broadcasts around the world with some of the biggest developers, some of the best tournament organizers, but I was born in South Africa and I started my esports career in South Africa, and I'm really passionate about my own small region. So I've constantly explored this question as well. And I think Richard's take on how the gameplay gets used to hold up the show has a lot to do with actually why we don't see bigger viewer numbers in smaller regions. We struggle to attract viewers. The truth is sometimes, and I'm probably going to get into a lot of trouble for saying this, the gameplay just isn't good enough. It's pretty average, and the show around it is unable to pull out all the stops. Maybe it's because of money, maybe it's just because of a lack of understanding of how to produce a show, and it ultimately makes sense that people might not seek out that content. One of the other things that I've always thought about, at least when it comes to my own region, which is a small one, is if maybe we tried to run before we could even crawl. And when I say that, let me give you some context. Richard spoke about the arcades, of how, the concept of competitive gaming was you would be playing at an arcade, you wanted to beat the kid with the highest score in your local arcade, and then if you did that, you wanted to beat the kid with the highest score in a town away. And there was this organic growth of competition, if you like. I wonder if esports lost that over the years, where, and again, I've seen it in the smaller regions where we were suddenly throwing giant prize pools, lots of money, chunks of money, at something that hadn't really had a chance to develop a foundation or to build a community.
Yeah, I think you can look at how that doesn't work. You look at stuff like the Overwatch League and just sort of how that is cratering, no matter what they tell you. I talk to people who've put good money into that league, and if anyone says publicly they're confident that it's going to turn around, especially with all the problems Activision Blizzard is having, they're full of shit. I mean, they're lying to you. And the fundamental problem with Overwatch was they didn't give the game room to breathe. They wanted to roll it out, and boom, here's our incredible investment opportunity, big shiny esports franchise league. And it's almost kind of comic in a way, because comedic, because if they just waited, we probably would have actually had the grassroots build up, and this would have been a really good time to focus on that, because we can't have big bombastic LAN events because of COVID protocols. Obviously hindsight's 2020, but there is, for me at least, a sort of an amusement I can take in the fact that they got so stung because they were so arrogant, so conceited that their way was the best. But I also do think this idea of community first is massively overplayed in esports. This word gets bandied around. The fundamental problem esports has is the tribalism. And that is that if you're a fan of Counter-Strike, do I watch a Valorant broadcast? Do I watch a Dota broadcast? Do I watch a League of Legends broadcast? What about Rainbow Six? What about some of the lesser games? Do I ever watch Hearthstone? And then what you realize is, while I might have a cursory understanding of all of those games, I'm not invested in those games. I mean, typically, if I'm an esports fan, I'm invested in one game and one team or set of players within that game. And so, I might not even watch that game religiously if my team's not playing or a player I like isn't playing. So it's not like sports. And this is the problem. We apply this sports model to it. The bottom line is, I think it's fair to say a football fan will sit down and watch football, and generally will watch a lot of other sports too. For example, if my football highlights were packaged with something I don't like as much, I don't think I turn the TV off. But the phenomenon in esports is, ultimately, I only want to watch the one game. And so when we talk about esports fans, we don't mean esports fans. But there are very few fans that have an interest in all esports simultaneously. And this, of course, is where you start getting into all the lies and the fudge numbers. It's okay to say that the esports market is growing, but what does that mean for one specific game within that ecosystem? And usually not very much. So the tribalism's a big problem. Esports would be in a much stronger position financially if we sort of had fans that were willing to consume multiple forms of content, because we're comparing our entire ecosystem across all of the competitive games to just the audience for Premier League football, just the audience for the NFL, just the audience for the NBA. You wouldn't dream of like combining the NBA and the NFL audience and going, look at American sports and how well it's doing. You just wouldn't do that. So it's a bit of a false equivalence, and I don't know if it needs to change. I'm not saying everyone should be a fan of every game or every esport, whatever, but it would certainly be better for us all if that was true. So just back to the community point, I think very often as well, when people say communities, are they anymore? They were probably in our day when we used to sit on a forum and we were essentially the people that would end up running the tournaments in our free time on the weekend or doing the commentary. We did it all, essentially. But now I feel that even the supposed diehard audience, they're here for 2 years. They're Counter-Strike fans for 2 years. And then, Apex Legends is popping off. I'm an Apex fan. Now it's, influencer culture, I think, has been a big part in the erosion of the esports hardcore. It's got us a bigger audience, but it's hindered dedication and growth of that genuine community spirit.
We've seen this rise of new game, who dis, in esports. There's a new title every few months, which is going to be the next big thing. That's what we get told. And then it slowly fades away. But there are certain titles that seem to have staying power. I mean, I look at a title like Counter-Strike, which has held its own, in my opinion, against the new blood coming in. So why does a game like CS stand strong when some of the newer titles, like Overwatch, see this initial large audience and then just watch it dwindle away?
I think I think why certain titles draw more attention is, I mean, some games, like you say with CS, I mean, I don't think our viewership has been immune to the changes in the current esports landscape. I think we've definitely suffered a little bit, and I think going into this major, we sort of have to hope that the novelty of it being the first major in a long time and a genuine LAN event with a crowd, which hasn't happened in a long time in CS, we have to hope that carries us through and that we're going to somehow break some viewership records, which I don't believe we can do that. I just don't think. I think the game is dwindling. I think North American interest is moving away. And different markets, different regions are different. But here's the problem that you have these days with influencer culture and just general marketing focus. When a game comes out, there are certain regions where the stakeholders and again, it's not just influencers as in, a guy who sits on a Twitch stream pretending to be scared of a video game. I mean, I'm talking about actual people who have business influence. But, those people make a concerted effort to drive an audience to the new hotness so they can get that big, delicious cash injection and maybe be around for 10 years. And so you end up seeing quite often, I mean, it's Valorant at the moment, right? I mean, Valorant, and people CS has definitely been hurt by it. And anyone who tells you otherwise is, again, they're a liar. The Brazilian region now, which obviously used to love Counter-Strike, it's a historic region for Counter-Strike and a region of unbelievably dedicated fans. They'll watch absolutely anything that involves Brazil. But they're moving away to Valorant now. That game is becoming more and more popular there, and eventually it'll be the go-to FPS for all Brazilian youngsters. Then you've got, what's happening in North America. All of the big organizations, like there's no point in supporting CS. Let's all move over here. Let's all do co-streaming. Riot Games says, yeah, okay, yeah, huge. So what's happening is you create essentially an artificial spike at the start of a game. And then you hope over time that experience is so pleasant for the people that were there in the initial days, they stick around. But the life cycle of that excitement, it used to be pretty spread out. And now I feel like there's a new hotness every year. Kind of feels like that. I lived through Apex being the Fortnite killer. I lived through Fortnite being unassailable, and people don't even talk about that now. Like, what's Epic Games doing with all this $100 million they said they were going to spend? Where is it? Oh, that's right. You're too busy jammed up in lawsuits with Apple over some bullshit. Before that, it was PUBG. Before that, it was H1Z1. It's like It's just a procession of marketing bullshit.
If you're a tournament organizer or an esports content creator, you want to feed the marketing machine so it can push out some more of the bullshit Richard speaks about, right? You know the new titles seem to get these eyeballs on them, so pivoting to them each time will draw in more players and more fans and ultimately more money. So maybe that's why we see this hop around and jump around every year to something new. That's the current frame of thinking. If you look at what tends to happen when a new game drops that is esports ready, I see this all the time. Tournament organizers rush to be first to market with an event. Content creators pivot. I feel like I should have a Ross from Friends soundbite here. Pivot. Fancies flitter around and everyone believes they need to focus in on that one title that will, for want of a better term, make it and potentially make them. But how do you decide which game to throw all your things at?
Yeah, you gotta create some sort of value, and again, it comes back to product. It's the one thing esports people skimp out on is the product always. They don't hire the right talent for the broadcasts. They don't think about value created beyond the value they create for themselves by encouraging people to spend money. It's just ranking competence a lot of the time. What you have to do is create value for a hardcore consumer base that will support you. It's interesting. I think more and more with the advent of crowdfunding and other phenomenons such as this, you can see there is a real thirst for authentic, be it content or experiences that people are willing to pay for. And think about all of the hugely successful enterprises that literally operate on a purely donation basis. Think about streamers that are millionaires, multi-millionaires, that rake in millions every month on the basis of it being tips, essentially. And what you realize is, if an individual can sit down and offer that kind of value and a business can't, the business is a fucking failure. So I can't put it any simpler than that. If one guy in a room with a webcam can figure it out, surely you can too. And so, that's it all just comes back. They used to say in the day, content is king. That's a bit of a glib statement. Essentially, what it goes to is that if your product's good, people will ultimately pay for it. And if you're smart with the marketing, you will get in front of enough people and generate enough word of mouth. For an individual and not a business, I think the one thing you have to do in esports is be flexible. I've given up on essentially mentoring. I still do it occasionally, but I used to do it religiously, mentoring young people that come into the industry, because they only want to write about one game and they only want to do it for 3 months, and they only want to do it, because the game is popular, and they only want to do it because they think everyone will love them and say, oh my God, this article was the best thing I've ever read, when in reality, they don't even read it. They don't understand there's like a ladder that you sort of inherently have to climb. And the best way to get up a very slippery ladder with people above you stamping on your fingers is you better be flexible. You better be versatile. And a lot of people come with a very sort of closed mindset about what they want to write about. There's a million people that want to write about Counter-Strike. There's a million people that want to make content about Counter-Strike. A million people who want to be commentators. What are you going to do differently? What's your angle? What's your gimmick? What's your hook? Because again, product is king. And so, with me, I was telling the truth about esports at a time when everyone was really fucking insecure to tell the truth about esports. That was my gimmick. And it was and if it sounds easy, it certainly wasn't, because people tried to push me out of the industry all of the time. People used to say to me, Richard, why do you only ever talk about the bad things? And I would be like, because everyone else is talking about, exclusively the good things. And that's how I was able to sort of transition to where I am now. So you don't have to be a pain in the ass like I am, sure. but that you have to offer something unique. And so the model you would apply to a business, if you think about that on an individual basis and add to it the sort of flexibility, the willingness to move and try new things and write about things that are out of your comfort zone and learn about them, that's always going to put you in good stead, whether you're a journalist or a content creator or, you know, whatever it is that you're particularly good at.
TLDR, instead of trying to jump on the next big game or the next big thing, rather focus on the things that Richard spoke about there, creating value, making sure you have a good product. It's as basic as that. But in smaller regions, this doesn't always translate. So remember how we spoke about the niche of the niche? Now, imagine you live in a region where the player base for a particular title is smaller than the amount of copies of that title sold in half the stores in London in the UK. Now, cut that down even more to players in that base who would want to be competitive. You've got this tiny little community, and even with a valuable product, the amount of fans you can reach is fundamentally tapped from the get-go. Also, I am not imagining this. I live in South Africa. This is basically how it works here when it comes to esports and games. Our player bases are minute. So what is the answer? The casual gamer. Obviously, I mean, I wanted to try to be super hype here because, gosh, I hear this so much in pitches. We will get the casual gamer. But is this even possible?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with outreach or an attempt to convert, because everyone who has ever been a fan of any sport has started out as a non-fan. And it's usually through play that people transition into an interest in sport, although not always. I'll say that, I played a lot of rugby in my day, and I don't watch rugby religiously. I only watch the international matches. I don't have a club team, essentially. So it's not always a true model. But I think the reason there's so much focus on wanting to bring in the casual gamer is because that slice of the pie is so large in comparison to the piddly little slice that is hardcore esports aficionados. And remember, we're already dividing that slice into multiple other thin slivers of pie because there are so many competitive titles to choose from. Yes, the necessity for the people who want to make money is we must bring in the casual gamer. And if you can do that, and as I said, League of Legends hasn't succeeded as much as I would have liked, but it's certainly been one of the more successful ventures in that regard. Then, people see it as not just a license to print money. That's a big motivator, but it also means you can print money for longer because the product you make will last longer, because you will always be able to essentially leverage the following for money via sponsors and potential investors and league partners and that kind of thing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just think no one's really cracked the formula of what turns a casual gamer into an esports fan.
You're creating value. You're trying to figure out how to turn a casual gamer into an esports fan. And as Richard said, you'll probably be the first, so maybe bottle that idea and sell it. And the views still aren't coming. But are views the measure of success when it comes to esports broadcasts and esports content? Is that what sponsors see as their major return? Is that what fans use to judge whether they'll come back for more? There's actually a lot more to this specific question, and later in the season, we're going to deep dive right into it with some more experts from the esports field. But I did want to get Richard's opinion on this in terms of how we judge success. Why are views so important?
So look, a person, I guess, like me, essentially, right? And people will certainly, if they listen to this, they'll go, "Oh, but Richard Lewis, you're always attacking the Overwatch League based on its dwindling viewership. In fact, you work that in, it seems, every time you talk." But that isn't a measure of true success. That's a measure, essentially, of reach and engagement. And I think you will not be long for this world if you don't have that. But I know also from the sponsor side of things, reach and engagement is essentially meaningless if your audience doesn't want to spend any money. You know, what's the point in spending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions, to make an esports product that people are watching, and then they go, yeah, but I don't want to buy any of those. I'm not going to support the sponsors. I'm not going to click on the website. I'm not going to click on the links. I'm going to have my ad block up, and I'm going to shut everything out. And even when they try and force activations, as they call them, down my throat, I am going to steadfastly refuse to spend a penny on anything that supports the ecosystem of the thing I claim to love. Which, by the way, the esports fan is the most pandered to sports fan in the world and gets the most content for free. And I say this as a guy who in 2011, I think it was, I was vehemently against pay-per-view being brought in when MLG tried it. But now, as an older guy and having got behind the curtain and seen the numbers and the money, esports fans are ridiculous, quite frankly. Esports fans think the show gets made for free and the sponsor money covers it all. In fact, tournament operators barely break even or might make a very small profit each time they do it. And then what happens is the esports fan says, okay, that was good. Better be better next time. I want more prize money. I want, you know, a better broadcast. I want nicer graphics. I want more shoulder content. Give me. And then you go, well, will you spend anything? And I bought an esports jersey 2 years ago. I'm good, I think. And they don't spend any money. So a successful esport is a successful broadcast, whatever you want to, you know, whichever part of it we want to assess, is you could have 50,000 viewers. And if that, and if say 10% of that is going out and buying in-game merchandise, digital merchandise to support the teams, support the developer, buying physical merchandise, engaging with sponsors, if that 10% is dedicated to it, then that's the most successful esport of all time. Because in reality, the percentage of the people who do that in esports is ridiculous. It's like it's a fraction of 1%. So the viewership is only a clue to the health of an esport.
As someone working in the industry, I wish that I could take that specific soundbite from Richard and just play it to so many people I've spoken to or sat in meetings with, whether they be tournament organizers or brands looking to sponsor esports or just esports content creators. Because it is the argument as old as time. If I was spending money and I wanted to, the word invest, but give money to an esports broadcast or an esports content creator, I'd much rather invest in someone getting real engagement that is ultimately able to sell my product, because that's why I'd be giving them money. I want to sell a product, over one with inflated views or follower numbers, or my favorite at the moment, impressions, which to me feels like such a dumb metric. Oh, look, 1 million people saw this thing, but 2 commented on it. It just makes no sense to me. However, again, I mean, this is purely my opinion. And it's interesting because a lot of people, whether you see them talking on big panels or on other podcasts or just online, they all say this time and time again. Oh, you know, when it comes down to it, we need to look at engagement. But it's not 100% true, because those same people, when they're putting together presentations or banding about numbers, this is specifically when they're banding these numbers online or publishing the pat yourself on the back tweets, they're using those vanity metrics and they're not necessarily looking at the stuff that matters. So I'm curious, at the end of the day, you know, is something like, are we selling product? Are we sending fans down the marketing funnel? Is that being measured?
And you better believe, if you think someone like Activision Blizzard cares about their players, you know, the player is just a conduit. You know, they just want to hoover the money out of their wallets. So yes, there are. I mean, these things are certainly being monitored. It's just, if you talk about it, if you start talking about how the sausage gets made, it puts everyone off their dinner. Esports fans don't like to be told they're selfish, despite being pandered to. that they really need to spend more, that they're only being sought after by these companies that make the product because they're supposedly a desirable income bracket. They don't like hearing that. It makes them upset. They want everything for free, and they play the game. What more do you want from me? Well, unfortunately, a lot more. And if you want, I don't want it to go to a situation where we end up with everything's on pay-per-view, like in some sports, like with the UFC. If I want to see a top fight, I'm paying, it was like $99 last time. I certainly hope esports never gets there. I think that's gone too far. But the reason the UFC model does that now is because of all the debt they got themselves into to build the product up to the point it's at, because it was being given away for free. There was lobbying that needed to be done. There was all sorts of problems with that. And esports is at that stage now. There's a lot of parallels with the development of Dana White's UFC and where we're at now with a lot of esports titles. And, we're at that crucial stage where it's spend, invest, lobby, push. And we're not looking at the revenue streams coming in. We're assuming it's going to be there down the line. And that's why people think of esports as a bubble. I've lived through 2 esports bubbles. It'll still be here if this is another one and it pops. But this will be the worst of all of them. So, yeah, people are looking at how whether or not the average esports fan is being pushed into becoming an esports consumer. It's just, if they publicly admit that isn't happening, investors will lose confidence in the business. Stakeholders will start to panic. Share prices will start to drop. And as I said, esports fans will start to go away, because despite this just being the simple truth that none of this is done for free, they hate being reminded of the fact that they are just but a number. And if they don't spend money, that number is ultimately meaningless.
I'm going to segue a bit here. By now, you can obviously tell that this is a pre-recorded interview. And rather than hearing the standard question and answer format, I wanted to make Tech Girl Talks a little bit more in depth, framing Richard's answers, the questions I was asking, and kind of giving an understanding of why I was asking those questions with some of my own inputs. After we'd spoken about measurement, though, I did actually go a bit off the prepared line of questioning, because I wanted to hear his views on things like referral codes and ways for smaller regions who maybe don't have a Riot or Activision Blizzard budget to hire companies to measure this stuff, how those regions could potentially find ways to, I suppose, prove their content had the ability to push the consumer down the marketing funnel. About that clickbaity title for this episode that I spoke about right in the beginning, I'm sure you figured out by now that this is less about why no one is watching your esports broadcast and more about how to improve whatever esports content you're putting out there. And we're getting that advice from the brain of someone who has done it time and time again. I mentioned at the start of this episode that Richard Lewis is one of my idols. I honestly believe he has a great understanding of what the fan wants, even when they don't necessarily know themselves. So let's turn this on its head for a minute. Instead of asking why no one is watching your esports content, I decided to ask Richard, how do you get someone to watch or consume your esports show or the esports content that you're making? Listen closely now. The not-so-secret syrup is about to be gloriously shared.
You have to just understand value and what it is you can essentially offer that is going to stand out from a marketplace that is not just oversaturated. It is ruthless. It is brutal. There is no, we're still in the we're still climbing out of the primordial ooze, and we're essentially sorting out the winners and the losers, in terms of esports evolution. Some businesses, some regions, games, entire landscapes, entire ecosystems, they're going to fall by the wayside. They're going to die. They're not going to thrive. And when they do, it's going to be a hit for esports as a whole, but it's going to be necessary. It's going to be, and so this marketplace is savage. So, and there's so much of it. It's like, Why do I watch one thing over another? Here's how I always frame, and when I get in a room with these people, because this is how you have to make them understand it. Because they're like, oh wow, yeah, esports is the new hotness. So how do we get this broadcast to be popular and whatever shit they're jabbering on about? And what they never understand is this is an attention economy, right? You sit down and watch an esports broadcast, but you could go and watch a movie. You could binge watch Netflix, right? You could be out having a drink. This is how time, is the big. This is the big nut you have to crack. Why do you prioritize one thing over another? That's what it all comes down to. On its just fundamental level, esports isn't competing with other esports. Games aren't competing with games. Why do you play 5 hours of Madden instead of doing 5 hours of this, 5 hours of that? It's the value that you perceive it to bring. And so I think if you want to get people to invest in your thing, whatever it is, you have to understand what you're stacked up against first and foremost. And so we get back to that question of value. What do I offer that nobody else does? And you've got to be confident in that, and you've got to be confident people want that, and you have to present it in a way that the people who want it come and get it, and the people who don't think they want it, maybe they're going to come and have a look, and maybe they'll get some of it too, because why not? And so, if you're making a stream, know what you do well, know what the people want. I'm so tired of broadcasts playing it safe. They have all this unbelievable talent, like unbelievably talented people, and you work as broadcast talent, so you probably know this. You have these really outgoing, gregarious, intelligent, super talented people. They can sing, they can dance, they can do it all, and you get to ask 3 fucking questions in 6 hours. So what are we doing? Where's the value in that? And there is none. And people are hampered and held back because, especially American corporations, they only really understand playing it safe. So you have to take risks. You have to know your worth. You have to know your value. And you have to find people that can see that too. And if you do all of those things, it's not a guarantee of success, but it's as close as you'll get to one.
You've been listening to Tech Girl Talks, a playlist original. New episodes drop every Wednesday. I'm Sam, Tech Girl Wright, an esports shoutcaster and host, as well as a passionate fan. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at TechGirlZA. I also host Tech Girl Talks More on twitch.tv/TechGirlZA every Thursday at 1 p.m. SAST to answer your questions about the latest podcast episode. If you found this episode interesting, please make sure to give it a review and share it with your friends. Tech Girl Talks can be heard wherever you get your podcasts.